Hey, if you want access to the transcripts and the show notes and the links talked about in this episode, you can head to seven, so the word all spelled out, SEVEN health.com/302. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Real Health Radio. I'm your host, Chris Sandel. I'm a nutritionist and a coach and an eating disorder expert, and I help people to fully recover. So I'm currently taking on new clients, and I fundamentally believe that people can change and that you can change despite what your eating disorder may be telling you. And I've been working with people for over 15 years now, and I'm very good at what I do and very good at helping people to reach a place of full recovery. And when I think about the work that I do, it largely centers around three main areas. So those areas are getting your physical health to repair and recover. And this is important because your physical health has a massive impact on all the symptoms you get, but also how your brain and mind work. So the kinds of thoughts and feelings and perceptions and beliefs and all of these things that are going to naturally occur to you are impacted upon by the physical state that you're in. So it's important not just to have physical symptoms to go away, but to also have an impact on your mental health, to have an impact on your emotional health. We look at things like developing resilience and constructive coping skills. And this is something I'm going to be talking about today and is the topic for today's podcast. And this is really important because as I'm going to go through, most people, once they've had an eating disorder for any amount of time, it becomes their only way of being able to cope. And that's not great if you're trying to recover and get out of the place that you're finding yourself in. And then the third piece is starting to live a life, and a life that is fun and joy-filled. And I understand that not every day is going to be like that, but so often the eating disorder makes your life smaller and smaller, and so many things fall by the wayside. And counterintuitively, what this does is it makes you hold on to the eating disorder more and more. So rather than saying that this thing is actually destroying my life and has been for a very long time, and now I'm incapable, or the eating disorder makes me believe I'm incapable of doing a whole host of things, and I'm no longer doing so many of these hobbies that I used to love, rather than this being this moment of realization of, wow, I need to get rid of this thing that is doing this to my life, there is much more of a feeling of I need to hold on to this thing. And so really working on those three areas is what I focus on as part of the work that I do. And this leads to many different changes. It leads to you having better connection and more authenticity. It leads to you having more vibrancy and energy and ability to do life. It allows for more spontaneity and freedom, and for spontaneity to be a thing that you are genuinely excited about, not terrified by. And so there are many, many components that we work on in terms of the stuff that we go through, but the focus really is how do we simplify it and how do we focus on these three areas and get you to a place where the eating disorder is no longer dictating your life, where you're not just marking time and marking days. You're actually genuinely thriving and living and enjoying your best life, living in accordance to your values and what you truly want to be spending your time on. And I know that can sound fairly lofty given the way that the eating disorder can constrain what your brain or your mind thinks is possible, but it is truly where people get to. And so if you want to get to that place and no longer be a slave to the eating disorder and no longer be constrained in terms of the life that you're living, then I would love to help. You can email info@7-health.com and put in the subject line coaching, and then I will get back to you and I will send you the details of how we can schedule a free initial chat, a free discovery call, so we can look at, are we a good match? How do we work together? And if this would be the thing that is going to help your recovery. So the other thing I want to mention before we got started, and I mentioned this a couple of episodes ago, is that we have video now with these podcasts. I think the last one that went out, there wasn't any video because I'd recorded it prior to this changeover and it was with a guest. But all of the solo episodes now going forward are going to be video, and the majority of the ones with guests going forward will be two. I think there's a couple that I haven't got video for, but everything else is going to have video. And so if you are listening to this and you missed that announcement on one of the previous episodes, then you can go and watch the video. So we're putting the video up on YouTube, we're putting the video up on Spotify, and we need to look at where else the videos can go. But you then get to see me, if that helps, as part of the listening experience or the enjoyment experience with this. There is video. So I just want to make people aware if you are unaware of that. So on with today's show. And as I mentioned earlier, today, what we're going to be going through is coping skills outside of the eating disorder. And really the question that I have for you is, what coping skills do you have outside of the eating disorder and the behaviors that are connected to the eating disorder, whether that be doing things with your food, whether that's doing things with exercise, whether that's low-grade movement, all of these different components and behaviors that are connected to the eating disorder. If we were to remove all of those things, how would you be able to cope? How would you be able to cope when you have a difficult day, or someone makes a comment, or you receive an email from someone at work, or there is these uncomfortable thoughts and feelings that arise, or someone sends you a text message and says, hey, do you want to come out for dinner? I know it's last minute. Are you able to join us? And so looking at all of these different scenarios, like how would you be able to cope if it's not the eating disorder? Because what typically happens is that the eating disorder becomes someone's main way and typically only way of being able to cope. And this isn't how it often starts out for most people. Like, sure, there are some people that from pretty much day one, the restriction or the exercise or the components of the eating disorder are someone's way of coping. And in the beginning, maybe it's a little more innocuous, but it quickly becomes their primary coping skill. But that's not often the case for most people. It's kind of a slippery slope into this. And originally there was a lot more coping skills and there are other ways of being, but over time that just gets chipped away at and chipped away at. And then they find themselves in a situation, and you may find yourself in a situation that, yeah, I just don't have ways of being able to cope unless I'm doing the eating disorder behaviors. And one of the reasons why this becomes the case, where you go from a place where I did have these other abilities and then they just kind of disappear, is because I think of eating disorders as being anxiety disorders. And the thing with anxiety disorders is they're about avoidance. And the more you start to avoid, avoidance begets more avoidance. And so if you haven't done something for a week, it may be a little challenging. If it's been a month, it's more challenging. If it's been a year, it's even more challenging. And because with eating disorders, there's just so much of this avoidance going on, because there's so much rigidity, and I have to eat at certain times, or I have to have these certain safe foods, or I have to do things in this particular schedule, or I have to have done all of these things first before I'm allowed to eat, and all of these rules get built up. There is then a lot of avoidance, and avoidance is then doing the opposite of that. And as that goes on more and more, people lose the ability to be able to cope, because in a lot of ways, anytime there is an opportunity for you to have a chance to develop some other kind of coping skill or to use some other coping skill, the eating disorder just comes in and becomes your first port of call. And so whereas previously you would have situations where maybe uncomfortable feelings came up, or maybe you received a text message that was leaving you in a state of like, oh gosh, how do I respond to that? You would figure out a way, and there would be other forms of coping. But when the eating disorder swoops in, it then just kind of neutralizes all of those things, and it just then becomes the number one and only way of dealing with this. And what I often see and find and hear from people is that if they are starting to do recovery, and this is very common with people who are starting to do recovery on their own, is that they just try and white knuckle this stuff. So rather than thinking like, how do I actually learn some different skills to deal with when certain emotions come up or when certain thoughts come up, really the only skill that they're using is like, I've just got to white knuckle my way through this. And there is a small percentage of people where they're able to do that. That's fine. But I think the drawback with that is you're still then never learning particular skills. And so the only skill that you then have is white knuckling. And the thing that I think about with recovery is it's the perfect training ground for life after having an eating disorder. Because if you can learn how to deal with uncomfortable thoughts and feelings and the recovery process and make your way through that. And you're learning those skills because of going through that process. When you're out the other side, you then continue to use these skills. Like so much of the stuff that I go through with clients and I work on in this capacity around coping skills, I use on a daily or weekly basis. I have a small child who is nearly 7. And yeah, not every day is a blissful walk in the park. I mean, no day is blissful. There are always moments, there are always challenges. And so many of the exercises, the techniques, the practices that I share with clients is stuff that I use myself because life will always be lifey. There will be stuff that will come up. And this is then a really important thing to remember because I think often there can be this feeling of, I'm going to do recovery. I'm going to spend this chunk of time doing it, however long that's going to be. And then once I get out the other side, all of that stuff that I learned, I'm just going to put to the side and I'm never going to use it again. And so I'm learning all these things that are almost like they have a very specific shelf life. And then it's in some ways it's wasted time. And my perspective is, no, that's not the case. Like what you're going to learn in recovery is going to serve you the long haul. It's going to serve you for the rest of your life. And you're going to use these things that you learn in recovery for the rest of your life. And so if your only way of being able to deal with this stuff is white-knuckling, like one, you're missing out on the opportunity of learning other skills. But two, I think at some point you just run out of gas with that. You run out of the capacity to just continue to white-knuckle. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I don't think that's a great strategy. I think the other strategy that people try and use if they're not just doing white-knuckling is, how can I try and reason with the eating disorder? So maybe if I can come up with better arguments, with better ways of framing something, then I'm going to be able to recover, and then it's going to get easier. And then the thoughts are just going to drop away because I've come up with this stellar one-liner or stellar argument, and then the thoughts are going to just drop away. And it's not that I don't do reframing or I don't say, okay, let's look at this in a different way. I think there is some benefit to that. But if that is your only way of dealing with things, it doesn't work particularly well. And it doesn't work particularly well because what typically happens is you just enter into a conversation. And you're entering into a conversation with the eating disorder with the goal of, I'm hoping to win this conversation. And at some point, the eating disorder is going to say, actually, yeah, you're right. You've made a really good argument. I'm going to just go off in the corner now and I'll leave you be. And that is just never going to happen. You're arguing with a terrorist. You're arguing with someone who is just ideologically opposed to any of the ideas that you come up with. And what happens is it just then becomes this arms race where you come up with this idea and then there's this other idea and it just kind of keeps going in that way. Or even when you're able to come up with some great thing that knocks down a particular idea, something else just comes up. And so it just then becomes a game of whack-a-mole. And so, okay, I was able to convince myself on this thing that, okay, maybe that isn't unhealthy in the way that I was thinking about it, or maybe this other thing is unhealthy. And so that's how I'm able to get through it. And then you just move on. The eating disorder just moves on to the next thing. It doesn't matter if it's about the health, but what about the fact that there's this, that you're going to put on weight and you're going to be able to cope with putting on weight. And so if you're going into this way of like, how do I come up with a better argument? You'll find that you just keep falling flat on your face because either one, you're not able to argue your way out of it, or two, when you are able to win one little battle, you're going to continue to lose the war because it's just a game of whack-a-mole and the goalposts just keep getting moved and moved and moved. And so what I want to get across to people, and I think this is one of the big misconceptions with recovery, is the idea that to be happy, to be able to recover, I need to have all of these unhelpful thoughts, all of these uncomfortable feelings, all of these painful, uncomfortable sensations or emotions. I need them all to disappear. And that when they're disappearing, that's when I can either do recovery or that's proving to me that recovery is working. And I think that this is a really big misconception because one, that is never going to happen. And two, if you're using that as a yardstick for, is this working? You're going to constantly get the feedback of, no, this isn't working. And so really when I'm thinking about this, rather than how do I get all of these things to disappear, the goal is how do I learn to be able to cope with these things? And how do I learn that actually I am able to tolerate this discomfort? I am able to notice that this thing and this urge to exercise or this urge to restrict or whatever it may be, or the uncomfortableness of having eaten a particular meal or the anticipation anxiety of a particular meal coming up, like all of these things, they follow a pretty typical pattern where they start to increase, they then reach some peak, and then they start to come back down the other side. And how long it takes for that pattern to run its course will depend on the individual, will depend on what the challenge is, but it can be in as little as sort of 5 minutes that takes care of itself, or it could be a number of hours. But it does then follow that pattern. And there are even exceptions where, okay, it just stays high. And it's not that a couple of hours go by and it comes back down. It then just stays by. But again, what someone learns is that even though that is staying high, I've learned how to tolerate that. And where the biggest pain isn't actually that uncomfortable thought or feeling. It's the resistance to that uncomfortable thought or feeling. It's the added thoughts on top of that of like, why am I having this thought? When is it going to go away? Why am I still in this place? It's all of the extra suffering that is then added on top, versus if we just stay with that original thought and that's just allowed to be there, we notice that then starts to lose some of its power. And so what I want to go through is an exercise. And this comes from the book, The Happiness Trap by Ross Harris, I believe. And it was my entry into acceptance and commitment therapy. And so I use acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, a lot with clients. I think it's a really wonderful tool. And again, wonderful for recovery, but in life in general, I use so many of the different techniques and practices from it in my own life. And so I want to go through one of the exercises that he goes through in the book, because I think it's something that you can then reflect on for yourself. And so let me just pull it up. And so I'm going to ask a series of questions. And with each of these questions, there's a pair of responses. So there's going to be an A response and a B response. And for each of the pair of statements, I want you just to select the one that most accurately fits how you feel. And it's not that I 100% believe that this is the answer. It's just that this one feels more like how I typically respond or I typically think about these things. And so it's not like 100%, but rather, okay, of these two responses, which one do I think more accurately describes me? And what you can do at the end is you can tally up how many were I putting for A and how many were I putting for B. And so I'm going to go through these now. So the first question, 1A, I must have good control of my feelings in order to be successful. Or 1B is, it is unnecessary for me to control my feelings in order to be successful in life. 2A, anxiety is bad. 2B, anxiety is neither good nor bad. It is merely an uncomfortable feeling. 3A, negative thoughts and feelings will harm you if you don't control or get rid of them. 3B, negative thoughts and feelings won't harm you even if they feel unpleasant. 4A, I'm afraid of some of my strong feelings. 4B, I'm not afraid of any feelings, no matter how strong. 5A, in order for me to do something important, I have to get rid of all my doubts. 5B, I can do something important even when doubts are present. 6A, when negative thoughts and feelings arise, it's important to reduce or get rid of them as quickly as possible. 6B, trying to reduce or get rid of negative thoughts and feelings frequently causes problems. 7A, the best method of managing negative thoughts and feelings is to analyze them, then utilize that knowledge to get rid of them. 7B, the best method of managing negative thoughts and feelings is to acknowledge their presence and then let them be, without having to analyze or judge them. 8A, I will become happy and healthy by improving my ability to avoid, reduce, or get rid of negative thoughts and feelings. 8B, I will become happy and healthy by allowing negative thoughts and feelings to come and go of their own accord and learning to live effectively when they are present. 9A, If I can't suppress or get rid of a negative emotional reaction, it's a sign of personal failure or weakness. 9B, the need to control or get rid of a negative emotional reaction is a problem in and of itself. 10A, having negative thoughts and feelings is an indication that I'm psychologically unhealthy or I've got problems. 10B, having negative thoughts and feelings means I'm a normal human being. 11A, people who are in control of their lives can generally control how they feel. 11B, people who are in control of their lives do not need to control their feelings. 12A, it is okay to feel anxious and to try hard to avoid it. 12B, I don't like anxiety, but it's okay to feel it. 13A, negative thoughts and feelings are a sign that there is something wrong in my life. 13B, negative thoughts and feelings are an inevitable part of life for everyone. 14A, I have to feel good before I can do something that's important and challenging. 14B, I can do something that's important and challenging even if I'm feeling anxious and depressed. 15A, I try to suppress thoughts and feelings that I don't like by thinking about them. 15B, I don't try to suppress thoughts and feelings that I don't like. I just let them come and go of their own accord. So those are all of the questions, and you may need to pause the video and go back. You may need to stop it after each one and think, how would I answer this? But just looking at how many of these are coming up in the A column versus how many of these are coming up in the B column. And the thing that I want to add with this, it's not that if there is something that you can do that helps to reduce these thoughts or feelings or sensations, that you're not allowed to do it. It's more about what is the cost that I have by taking that action or by not knowing how to be able to sit with that uncomfortableness. So for example, if when these things come up, I have a breathing exercise that I can do, and I do that breathing exercise, and 5 minutes later, these thoughts and feelings and sensations are reduced by 60%, I'm going to do that as an exercise. The downside of me spending 5 minutes doing a breathing exercise is pretty small versus the upside benefit that I get. I really want you to understand it's not about that you're not allowed to do anything and that you have to just leave all of these things here. It's more the things that I'm choosing to do, are they truly adding to the quality of my life, or are they actually creating other problems in and of themselves? And then I'm now in a situation where my way of coping is actually creating a much worse quality of life than I would otherwise have if I learn other techniques to create room for emotions or for thoughts to be out there, but to diffuse the power that they have over me. And so I just really want you to get this piece, because I think this is where people get stuck. And it's especially where people get stuck when they're starting to do recovery, because there's this misconception of, but I thought once I started to do recovery, everything would get better. I was told that it was the eating disorder that was making things worse, and once I start to do recovery, everything's going to get better. And in the short term, that's just not true, in terms of there's going to be time where it takes for things to start to improve. And where many of the thoughts that do come up as part of the eating disorder, they do disappear once you are like nutritionally rehabilitated and you've got yourself into a better state and the recovery process has taken place. But it takes time to get to that place. And even when that has occurred and the unhelpful thoughts that you're having are no longer about your body or your weight or your food or the fact that you didn't exercise today or whatever it may be, our brains are still going to continue to give us unhelpful thoughts. Like, this is just part and parcel of being a human being, that when we are living, when we are interacting with other people, when we are having families and kids and we are running businesses or an employee, whatever it is, there are going to be challenges. And when those challenges come up, it's very natural for certain thoughts and feelings to arise. And so even if you get to a stage where the things that are uncomfortable for you have nothing to do with an eating disorder anymore, there's still going to be things that arise. And so this is why I'm saying that the white-knuckling piece isn't a great solution, because even after your eating disorder, there are going to be many unhelpful thoughts and feelings and sensations. So that is it for today's call. What I really wanted to do was just get you to start to reflect on yourself and the way that you are currently coping. And do you have ways outside of the eating disorder for how to cope? And if you don't, and your eating disorder is the only way that you're able to cope, is that a great long-term strategy for you having the kind of life that you want to lead? And if the answer to that question is no, and you don't want to be living a life like this, and you want to be able to have more spontaneity, more freedom, be able to do a lot more things than you currently can, then I would love to help. As I said at the top, I'm taking on new clients. If you send an email to info@7-health.com and put the word coaching in that subject line, and I will then send over details of how you can apply for a free discovery call and for us to talk about working together and for you to find out the details of what that would look like. So that is it for today's episode. I hope you found it useful. I will be back next week with another episode. It's a guest episode for that one. And until then, take care of yourself, and I will see you soon.